Hello, everyone, and welcome to Staffer, the show about people who work in government or politics at any level and what they take from the experience. I'm your host, Jim Papa, a partner at Global Strategy Group and a former staffer myself. My guest today is Jaime Harrison, the new chair of the Democratic National Committee. But first, before we dive in, I want to remind people that we have launched a new telephone hotline at the request of several listeners. The purpose of this hotline is to collect more staffer stories. They can be about anything: royal screw-ups, lessons learned, something outrageous that you saw in the cloakroom, or even the strange or meaningful story about how you got into politics. They can be anonymous or identified. The only requirement is that they be true. So please call in and we will play the best of on the air. The phone number is 1-888-416-2132, and we have the phone number posted on our website as well, staffershow.com. Okay, now back to our guest. I first met Jaime Harrison when we worked together on Capitol Hill. We were both leadership staffers and would often find ourselves standing next to each other at the back of a room known as HC5. It's a large room in the basement of the Capitol where the House Democratic Caucus met every week. The members sit in chairs organized in rows for this meeting, and staffers would stand in the back along the wall. Jaime was working at that time for Majority Whip Jim Clyburn of South Carolina, first as policy advisor and eventually as director of floor operations and counsel. Jaime and I were also attending law school at Georgetown Law, so in addition to talking about work, we also stressed out together about reading assignments and exams and lack of sleep generally. Jaime left the Hill in 2008 and spent some time downtown, but he decided to make his way back home to South Carolina, where he started taking on leadership roles in the state party there. In 2013, he became chairman of the South Carolina Democratic Party, and in so doing, became the first African American to ever hold that position. During that period, he also wrote a book. It's a handbook for staffers and aspiring staffers that he co-authored with a Republican colleague, Amos Snead. The book is called Climbing the Hill: How to Build a Career in Politics and Make a Difference. It's available on Amazon. In 2020, Jaime burst onto the national political scene due to his challenger campaign to unseat Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, a race that set fundraising records and inspired millions of voters in South Carolina and across the country. Though Jaime didn't win that race, the experience gave the country the opportunity to see what an inspirational leader he is. Following the election, Jaime was nominated and subsequently elected to be chair of the DNC. He took over that role on January 21st. I am so pleased to be able to sit down with someone I like and respect as much as I do Jaime. Jaime and I recorded this episode on Monday, March 15th. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Jaime Harrison, welcome to Staffer.
Oh, thank you so much, Jim. It's so good to be on with you.
It is wonderful to see you again and to be here with you. As you may know, I like to start my conversations with my guests talking about where they grew up and how they grew up. So, I know a lot about your background, and so do so many Americans. But for those, who haven't watched your Senate campaign, talk to me a little bit about where you grew up and what family life was like.
Well, Jim, I was a little round-headed boy that grew up in a small rural town in South Carolina, Orangeburg. I was the son of a teen mom. My mom was about 16 when she had me, and we stayed with my grandparents, who really raised me. Two amazing people. They didn't have a whole lot of education. My grandma, I think, 8th grade, and she ended up she picked cotton and worked in the textile industry, and then did some domestic work. And then my grandfather worked construction most of his life, and so. Folks that society would deem as, just simple, hardworking people. But in my mind, they were always rich because they taught me the value of being a good person, being a hardworking person. And so, I stayed in South Carolina until 18. Then I went on to college. I was fortunate enough to go to Yale, and then went to Georgetown Law. I taught 9th grade social studies for a year or so, and worked at a nonprofit, and then went to Capitol Hill, and that's where I met you.
That's right. That's right. How did you get into politics? So where along there did you discover that you loved politics and want to get into it?
Well, first real introduction to politics, my first political memory, I would say, is 1988, Jesse Jackson speaking at the Democratic Convention. Um, and, Jesse Jackson was from South Carolina, was from Greenville, South Carolina. That's where he was born and raised. And, here's this guy who's on TV who ran for president, who looked like me and is from my state, right? And he's talking about how young people can get involved. It was me, right? And so I would often spend time talking to my grandfather because, in my house, my grandfather, we had one television, and my grandfather, you could watch whatever you wanted any other time, but the morning news and the evening news, the TV was going to be there, right? And there was no, there was no other choice. And so I would sit there and watch because I wanted to watch TV. So I would sit there and watch with my grandfather and then pepper him with questions about, what's going on in the world and the presidency and this and that. And, in retrospect, my grandfather probably didn't know half of the things about half of the things he was talking about, but they made sense to me. And so I was always infatuated with Washington and what was going on in Congress and the presidents. And I fed that hunger in school, and so in my history classes and social studies classes, and eventually went on to college. I became a poli sci major, and I focused in American government. Got internships on the Hill, in the United States Senate and the U.S. House, and the rest is history.
Well, so your first job on Capitol Hill, your first paying job, as I understand it, was with Whip Clyburn.
Yes.
Jim Clyburn, famous political figure in South Carolina and now nationally. How did you link up with him and get into the whip operation?
Well, it's a funny story. I first met Jim Clyburn when I was a junior in high school. He had just been elected because my first campaign was the Clinton Gore campaign in '92, which also was Jim Clyburn's campaign. He had just been elected, and he was the first African American elected to Congress from South Carolina since Reconstruction. And so he got elected, and that fall, I had just gotten elected to become the president of the National Honor Society for my high school. And so for me, that was a big deal.
It is a
So
big deal.
my advisor said, well, you could get somebody to come and speak and install you all as officers of the DNC. I mean, of the National Honor Society. I was like, oh, who can I get? Who can I get? And I said, Congressman Clyburn. So I reached out to Congressman Clyburn's office and said, we're getting installed and I want the congressman to speak and install us. And they got the message to him, and he actually showed up.
I love it. That's actually such a characteristic of young people who end up succeeding is like the courage to make the ask, right?
No,
To
I didn't
extend
know
the
any better.
handshake first, right?
Yeah, I didn't know any better, so I did it, and he actually showed up. And I told him afterwards, I said, Congressman, I want to work in your office one day. And he said, well, I want you to go to college first. and and he said, and then we can look at an internship. And so I never forgot it. And so when I became a junior in college, I wrote to his office and said, I'm very interested in being an intern in Congressman Clyburn's office. And that's when they told me to submit an application through the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation internship program. And that's how I did it. And so I was an intern in Clyburn's office the summer of 1997. I worked my behind off as an intern. I was the first person to get there in the morning and one of the last to close the office down. And so they really enjoyed having me and they stayed in touch. So fast forward in 2002, Jim Clyburn is elected vice chair of the House Democratic Caucus. And he's looking for staffers for the vice chair's office. Well, I'm in law school at the time at Georgetown. So I'm driving, this is like December of 2002. I'm driving from Georgetown, from DC to South Carolina for the Christmas holiday break. And my cell phone rings and it's Yebby Watkins, who's Congressman Clyburn's chief of staff. And I talked to Yebby and said, "Hey, Yebby, how's everything?" He said, "Oh, things are well." I said, "I'm so excited that the congressman's been elected vice chair of the House Democrats. That's so awesome." He said, "That's great." And he said, "It may impact you." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, the congressman and I were just talking, and he wants you to come and join the staff." I'm like,
Wow.
"Whoa." I was like, he said, "The congressman remembered how hard you work. He wanted somebody who was from South Carolina that was smart, that could get this work, and we both thought of you." And I said, "Well, Gabby, I'm flattered, but I'm in law school at the time. I'm in the midst of my second year." He said, "We know. So we can work it out, but he wants you to come and work in the office." And
Incredible.
fast forward, lo and behold,
Wow.
man, and but 2 weeks, that January, I was working in the congressman's office.
So you start working in his leadership office.
Yeah,
He proceeds to ascend over the
yeah,
years, higher in leadership, and you stay with him and you elevate through his staff
that's
structure.
exactly right.
You served as executive director of the whip operation and also as floor director. Can you describe? Everyone hears, in high school civics, you learn about the whip, but can you describe for people what the whip operation does?
Yes. Well, and the trivia question is, I asked folks, uh, where does this notion of the whip come from? Like, right? What's the position? Well, it comes from, of course, jolly old England, and it actually comes from the sport of fox hunting. And there were these guys, the whole thing about fox hunting is, you got a pack of dogs that are chasing after this fox, right? And you got some guys, with, guns and all, and you got some guys that are sitting up on horseback. Well, the guys on horseback, they're on the edges of the pack of hounds. Those guys have little whips in their hands. They're called whippers ends. And so, in essence, the whippers ends role is to keep the pack focused on the task ahead,
I
which is
did
to
not know
chase
that.
after the fox, right?
Oh, fascinating.
So when you think about what is the role of the whip, the role of the whip is to keep the caucus focused on the task that is ahead, on the piece of legislation, on the bill, or what have you, and to keep them unified moving forward. And so my job as the floor director in the whip's office was in essence uh, to to count the votes to make sure we had 218 votes in order to get a bill passed out of the House to the Senate and eventually to the White House. And then we did that in coordination with all of the other leadership offices. The speaker, who is the speaker of the entire house, the majority leader, who is the leader, the floor leader on the floor, the caucus chair who convenes all of the members of the caucus. And our job was to make sure that we sent whatever the Democratic message is and the Democratic position, um, to make sure that there are enough of those Democrats who supported it. And then we would oftentimes, if we saw that we had problems, we couldn't get to the 218, then we would use that intelligence gathering to inform the rest of the leadership and the committees to make modifications so that we could get to the point where we had 218 votes to pass legislation.
So, in terms of that intelligence gathering, I
Yeah,
remember having participated in some of this with you. The way the records are kept, every member of the caucus, is on a sheet of paper,
yeah,
and they're given a number. A 1 is a member who is going to vote yes and has
yeah,
committed to a yes. A 5 is someone who has told you they're going to vote no. And
yep,
obviously, 2 is a lean yes, 3 is undecided, 4 is a lean no. And all of our jobs are get, 218 ones.
yes.
But so in terms of that intelligence gathering, tell me what makes a good vote counter?
Well, it is being able. This is the thing that folks should understand about members of Congress. It is now not all stories of courage, right? There's some members who are scared of their shadows. There's some members who don't want to tick off anybody, right? They want to be nice to everybody. And so oftentimes, as you know, Jim, we had to proceed in this effort that I call cleaning up the list. It is pushing people to the extremes. You want to know ultimately you want to get 218 ones, which are the yeses. But ultimately, you just want to get people into the corners that they're in. You want to clear out the leaning yes and the leaning no and the undecided and push to know, where are we on the yeses, where are we on the nos? And if we don't have enough yeses, then that means we need to pull some of these nos back, right? And so uh, sometimes that takes some arm twisting to move somebody from a no or leaning no or undecided over to yes. It is it is not a task for the for for the weak.
Yeah.
Um, and you got to use all of the persuasive tools that you have in your pocket.
And what are
Listen,
those? So let's talk about those. So,
yeah,
because the arm twisting, like it's sort of I think most people probably think of it as just pure pressure, but it's not just pressure. There's cajoling, there's persuasion, there's education. What are the tools that a whip operation has at their disposal to try to move a member from a no to lean no position to a yes?
yeah. So, in order to be a good whip, uh, the first thing that you need to do is you need to know the folks that you're whipping. You need to have some established relationship. You also need to understand what I like to call is their trigger. What is the thing that triggers them to act in the way that you want them to? Now, their members are not made the same. There are some members who are, pure policy wonks. There's some members who are pure politicos. Like they can give a damn about the policy. It's all about the politics. And then there's some members who are more constituent service driven, right? That's the thing that they really want to get in. So and then you get all kinds of mixtures. You need to, when you're whipping, you need to understand the type of member that you're talking to while you're whipping, right? Because then understanding that means then you start to understand their trigger. What is the thing that is so important to them that triggers them to act in the manner that you want? So if you're dealing with a policy want person, then the way that you approach them is with policy. You explain to them how the policy works. If it's a political person, then you have to explain to them in politics sense why this is important politically. And then sometimes that means bringing in political pressure either internally or externally in order to get them to move. So there were many times, and I can say this now because I'm no longer in a job. There were many times in which I would have to call into somebody's district and call the local NAACP and say, "Hey, now you didn't hear this from me, but this bill is coming up, and if I were you, I would call your member of Congress and see where they are on this particular bill." Right?
Yeah, right. And
No fingerprints.
the whole lead up to that of understanding the members and their triggers is listening, right? Which is an underappreciated skill when it comes to the quote unquote whip. You got to listen to people before you can persuade them.
Jim, that is such an important thing. And this is also part of what, so one of the things that we would do, we fed people in the whip's office. We had food all the time, right?
Yes, that's right.
All the time. And the members, some of the members in particular, I remember Ben Chandler, who was one of our Blue Dog members from Kentucky. And Ben loved Chinese food from Miwa, right? And so, the key to Ben Chandler's heart was, I would go up to Mr. Chandler and I would wait for, one of those weeks in which we had a really tough bill and some of our Blue Dogs members would be a little squishy. I said, well, Mr. Chandler, I I could order some Chinese food from Mima this week. if,
You guys
if you
always
could
had
just
better food.
if you could just sit down with me a little bit and let's talk about this. And his little eyes would light up. And it's like, Jamie, I really like this. All kidding aside, you just have to I would take those opportunities to really get an opportunity to learn about these members and who they were and about their kids and their families. And you learn, the more you also understand the picture of that member and what really motivates them. And so, I when I think back to that time, it's so much joy. There was a lot of anxiety, but so much joy because I really, really enjoyed that work and interacting with members in that way.
Well, it was a meaningful and an impactful period of time. Let me ask you about one particular member, and that is
Yeah.
Jim Clyburn,
Yes.
who you have spoken about as a mentor and a father figure, even.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, tell me what you learned from him, what he means to you.
Yeah. You know, Jim Clyburn is as close to a parent as my parent, to be honest. I call him my political dad. And probably every major decision in my adult life since the age of about 28, 27, I've made with Jim Clyburn's input and his advice. This is a man who is not big on the limelight. That's not the driving force for him. He's not the member that is always, first to run up to a microphone and jump on the floor to give some fancy speech. So when he speaks, people listen because it's not something that he does all the time. He's very thoughtful. He has an understanding of our history like nobody else. And he is so well respected, particularly on the Hill, but also at home. People, I mean, just look. I mean, this man, because of his endorsement, it changed the outlook of the presidential campaign.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. And so he really is a remarkable person, and he's extremely special. And one of the things he always taught me on about folks and members on the Hill, he would often say, Jamie, on the Hill, he said, they are show horses and they are workhorses. He said, you should always aim to be a workhorse because in the end of the day, it's about the work. He didn't care about who took credit of it. Just wanted the work done. And so he's also fiercely loyal. He is an extremely loyal person, and loyalty is so important to him. And you'll find that with all the folks that we call, Team Clyburn, from the Clyburn extended family, it's all about loyalty. It's loyalty to him. And he's a member who will never do something that he asks you to do something that he wouldn't do for himself. I tell you quickly this one story. I remember when I first joined the staff, Clyburn had his, folks have heard about the world famous Clyburn fish fry here in South Carolina, where he's had all these major political figures and all come. And my first fish fry, we're all there. People have been there. Thousands of people have come and gone. They've drinking and eating their fried fish and all this stuff. And it's time for us to like start cleaning up. And we're cleaning up and everything. And I asked, so where's the congressman? And I expected that he's already left, whatever. Somebody said, oh, that's him over there. And there's a congressman with a broom in his hand cleaning up, right? And my level of respect for him, seeing that day, just went through the roof,
Well,
and it's never come down.
yeah. I mean, he is so well respected nationally in Washington, at home.
Yes.
I mean, all of that loyalty that he gives to his staff is repaid, by his staff to him and to each other and members, which is why he's in the position that he's in within the House Democratic leadership. I want to get back to you for a minute. So when you left Mr. Clyburn's office, you spent some time in Washington. You represented some nonprofit and for-profit clients, but it wasn't long before you decided to go back home and get into politics.
Yeah.
You eventually became the vice chair and then the chair of the South Carolina Democratic Party. When did you know that it was time to go back home and get directly involved in state politics?
Yeah. I always wanted to be involved in state politics. And eventually I thought that, one day I wanted to run for office myself. And so that meant that I needed to find a path back home in order to do that. But I'd always been, even in Clyburn's office, very I got into our state party and working to help the state party. One of the first things that I did was back in 2006, when Howard Dean was chair of the DNC, and we had made it a decision as a party that we were going to add two new states to the early primary schedule, because it was at that point only Iowa and New Hampshire, and we were, the Democrats had decided, we want to make sure that we can add more diversity. Um, we, so it was South Carolina and Alabama as a possible two states to be the state with significant black population, and then there was Nevada and Colorado for a Western state. And so I got really involved in that process, and happy to say South Carolina won out over Alabama in the end. And that sort of planted a seed that, you know what, I want to get more involved in party politics. I like this angle. And so eventually decided to run for first vice chair of the state party, and then I became the chair of the party. And always, under Mr. Clyburn's guidance and leadership. But it was a tremendous opportunity to really think about how you rebuild a party that had kind of fallen apart.
Well, so you take on that role as chair in 2013, and in your tenure there has been compared often to the work of Stacey Abrams, right, in rebuilding and rejuvenating a Democratic Party in a state that hasn't had a lot of statewide success for Democrats. And in my mind's eye, I'm almost picturing like the movie about a sports team where the coach is looking at a group of talented players, but the team hasn't won in forever. And job one is not teaching them how to play better. It's teaching them to believe that they can win.
It's about hope, Jim.
Yes.
And that's the biggest thing. And, listen, and you know how my story went. Eventually, I ran for United States Senate, similar to how Stacey ran for governor in Georgia. I mean, now Georgia has gotten to the mountaintop. South Carolina, we're still trying to get there. But we're well on the path. Listen, we don't have an Atlanta. If we had an Atlanta, then I'd be like, oh, it's slam dunk, it's done, right? We don't have an Atlanta. But for the first time in a long time, there are a lot of people in the state, because of the race that we ran and what we've been doing here, that have hope that things are going to get better. That we will get real leadership in the state, and that to me is really, really important, because you can't achieve anything without having hope that things will get better, without having hope that you can become what you want to become. And for a long time, I think you saw this, and it not relegated especially to South Carolina, but across the South. And it's part of the reason why I talk about this concept of a new South, one that is bold, that is inclusive, that is diverse. It gives somebody something. It's a point to say, I'm going towards that, and I'm going to work until I get to that point on the horizon. And that's where we are right now. We've been wandering the wilderness here in South Carolina for a few decades now, but we see the mountain, and we're going to start climbing, and we're going to get to that mountaintop.
Well, your race was pivotal for that. It was inspirational, not just on a state level. I mean, you captured people all over the country and inspired thousands and thousands to want to participate in your campaign. You raised a historic sum for a challenger and really any campaign at the Senate level. I want to read you this headline from The Atlantic, which I love. It says, "The South has already changed, Jaime Harrison lost to Lindsey Graham, but expanded Democrats' vision of what's possible in the Deep South." Campaign folks, we're trained on a lot of things, right? I mean, there's voter mobilization, there's communication, there's grassroots allyship building, et cetera. There are all these different elements of campaigning. But this thing that you're talking about of hope and inspiration is not easy, and it isn't obvious. So what do you think the elements are to running successful, hopeful, ambitious campaigns outside of the technical elements that campaign operatives are, raised on?
Yeah. Well, I think, the first thing is going to the people, right? When I approach things here in South Carolina, I always tell folks is, listen, I don't always have all the answers, and no political leader does. But it's about going into these communities and listening to people, because many times those folks not only know what the problems are, but they also know what the answers are. They just don't have the means to get to that solution. And so that is the role of a political leader sometimes. It is connecting the folks who have solutions to their problems with the means in order to get those solutions realized in their communities. And so I have my ideas. Um, I know how to be a leader, um, but I also know how to be a good listener. And I think a good leader is a good listener. And so it's about going into those communities, not just parachuting in and say, "Oh, I have all the solutions to your problems," but more just listening to them and saying, "I know that you have problems. What are your solutions? How can we address them? How can I help you address them?" And that's a huge step, particularly for communities in which people don't go to, where folks feel marginalized and ignored. And I think that's the magic that Stacey Abrams has put into a bottle, and is just, she has just tapped into it like nobody has done so in a very, very long time. And she's not ignoring anybody. And because in the end of the day, Jim, regardless of who you are, you can be a billionaire, or you could be, a, a, a poor farmer in a rural town. Everybody wants to be seen. Everyone wants to be heard. Everyone wants to be valued. And that's something constant. But we don't do that in politics in the manner that we should. And I think if we did more of it, we will see much more success, particularly in communities that have been hit very, very hard and been marginalized over the years. The part that was sad for me is, but in addition to all of that, you also have to have organization. And here in South Carolina, we're still building the organization. In many of these states, you're still building the organization. So you got to have both. You got to have the hope, you have to have the inspiration, but in the end of the day, you have to have the organization that can help deliver the mechanisms to deliver the votes to the polls. And for some of us, it is flying the ship and building it at the same time. And that's why I think for me as DNC chair, it's going into these communities to tell these talented candidates that we can recruit, I got that part. You guys focus on inspiring. You focus on giving people hope. You focus on connecting on an emotional level. While I work with your state party leaders to focus on building the organization that can get the mechanism to get people to the polls, to fight back against the voter intimidation efforts and the suppression tactics. That's the component that I hope to bring now as DNC chair, is to so that a candidate is not carrying both bags, right?
Mm-hmm.
The role of a candidate, but also the role of a party. You can't win that way.
So you have been DNC chair since January.
Yes.
And of course, on the top of everyone's minds in Washington, Democrats and Republicans, is the first midterm of a first-term president tends to go against that president's party. And, it is reported that Republicans are licking their chops at their prospects, and Democrats are working hard to reverse that trend, which you have said.
Republicans should probably get a few fire trucks and put out the dumpster fires over on the side before they lick their chops.
Right. So tell me, how do we avoid in 2022 what happened in 2010?
I think if we continue to do what we did in 2020, which is organize, organize, organize. Jim, the history book said that incumbent presidents don't lose re-election. Well, for the first time in 30 years, an incumbent president lost. History also told us that Democrats can't win runoff elections in Georgia. but we didn't win one, we won two. And the unifying theme throughout those bucking of histories is we organized in a way that we hadn't done so in a long time. And I believe that if Democrats can continue to organize and to do it 24/7, 365 days a year and not let off, um, we will, in essence, see victory again. I mean, I believe wholeheartedly that the people, the vast majority of people are on our side.
Yeah.
Our challenge is getting them to the polls,
Mm-hmm.
getting them excited enough and getting them to the polls. That's what I believe our challenge is.
So you are one of those few staffers who has gone from being a staffer to being a principal, right? As a candidate and now as chair of the Democratic Party. I've always thought that being in the shoes of a candidate, and I'm using air quotes, even briefly, was helpful for staff. And I know when I was on the Hill, if people took, or wanted to take a couple of weeks to campaign, they would take vacation, go back to the district, campaign for a couple of weeks. I always thought door knocking was like the most important thing that one could do, because then you are face to face with voters and just how short a window you have to communicate, to answer questions, and how authentic you need to be, et cetera. You learn something a lot by interacting directly with voters. My question for you is, having now been a principal, 2 different jobs and still one, what advice do you have for staffers about what you've learned through that experience that maybe you didn't have before?
Well, one, Jim, I don't know if you know, but I wrote a book a few years ago called Climbing the Hill.
Oh, I sure did. We're going to get to it. Keep going.
Yes.
So tell me.
Which was chock full of advice for some of the young staffers. But I would say now, having worn the staffer hat and also the hat of behind the scenes guy hat, right, and now somebody that's a front guy, principal. I you know my advice for those, particularly staffers who think one day that they may want to run for office, right? Because there are a number of staffers that I think they see that as the launching pad. I think it's important to learn every single thing that you can about the process, and never think that things are beneath you to do, right? It's important to knock on doors. It's important uh, to answer the phones. Because why is that important? Because the most valuable and important asset to candidates, to elected officials, are people. When you are writing letters as an LC, when you are answering the phones as a staff assistant or an intern, when you're doing the member Hill meetings, the constituent meetings as an LD or chief of staff, you are meeting with the people. And the thing that I constantly remind folks about this is that sometimes people go to Washington, D.C. and Capitol Hill and they get elected to office, and they forget that the power is with the people and not with them. They get to the point where they believe that they are powerful. Like the power derives from them. But the way that I love the analogy that I love to give for this is that no, the power doesn't come from them. In essence, they are the moon, and they reflect the power of the sun. And where's the sun and who's the sun? It's the people back home in those districts. They have the power, and you just reflect it. So don't get caught up in it that you so think, oh, well, I'm a senator and therefore I'm all powerful. Hell no. You can be sent home just like anybody else. If the real power decides to wake up and say, you know what, we're done with you. And so as long as you always remember that, I think you'll stay grounded, and you'll stay humble, and you will always connect yourself with the will of the people that you're trying to represent.
Well, I'm really glad that you raised it. The book it's called Climbing the Hill, How to Build a Career in Politics and Make a Difference. You co-authored it with Amos Snead. It's hard to believe how much you've done, and it includes authoring a book, Jamie. It's available on Amazon. People should order it. It's absolutely fantastic. I have a couple of questions that I like to ask that are
Yeah.
recurring segments. And in the time that I have left with you, my one of my favorites is called "In the Vault," a time when you royally screwed up and what you learned from it.
Oh man. Time in which I royally screwed up. Hmm. Uh, God. The thing is, I try to be so thoughtful about everything I do. That doesn't mean I don't screw up. But I'm trying to think of something that pops. You know, I remember. Well, why don't I do this? A time in which Jim Clyburn really yelled at me,
Yeah, let's hear it.
and Clyburn was never a yeller, right?
That's right.
So this threw me. I was the ED of the caucus, and we were in the middle of, and you probably remember the Bill Jefferson situation.
I do remember.
And Congressman Jefferson was a congressional Black Caucus member from Louisiana who had been caught in this whole scandal about money and bribes and this and that. And the caucus was taking up this. Speaker Pelosi wanted to take his committee assignment away from him, but there were members of the CBC and others who did not want that to happen at that juncture. And so Jim Clyburn was the chair of the caucus at that time and the convener of this discussion in this meeting. And so I was in this meeting with Clyburn and I think with John Larson and a few other folks. And I had said something in the meeting that I think as a staffer I probably should have just held because there was other members in the room that I should have just said or pulled the congressman aside or sent him an email about it. I can't remember exactly what it was. But Clyburn looked at me and he spoke to me in a way that I had never heard Jim Clyburn sort of elevate and raise his voice. And Clyburn has that sort of
Deep,
a,
rich
a
baritone.
deep, yes, the
Yes.
baritone, and he did it with this sort of a sense of you will not do that again,
Yeah.
right? and and that was one of those moments for me in which I also had to step back and say, you know what, Jamie, you got to understand the timing and the place to do certain things and when it's right, and you got to be able to read the room because the tension at that level was so high. And I think I was just trying to tell him that he couldn't do that because of such and such and such, which it's fine most of the time. But again, it's about making sure that you understand and read the room and understand what's the right timing for you.
That's right.
And so I never made that mistake again.
That's right. Well, and it may be the difference. It may not have been the message to your point. Like maybe whispering in his ear. That's a different animal.
Yes.
That's a very good one. Let me ask you this: if I were to raise money to build a Hall of Fame to staffers and put it on the National Mall, who would you nominate to be in the Staffer Hall of Fame?
uh, uh, Number one, George Cadenas.
Yes. Yes. So explain who George Condanis is, because I'm right there
George,
with you.
George has probably worked for, I can't even recall how many speakers of the House. He is in the House, and he is George still with Nancy
Yes.
Pelosi?
To my knowledge, yes.
Yes, but George knows everything. I mean, there's not a scenario that can happen that George Condanis has probably not lived through.
Yep.
And just always a respected advisor, a respected voice. He's not a front man, but when he speaks again, people listen to him because they know that he knows what he's talking about. But George is a great guy, and I always love seeing him when I would go up to the Hill. My former chief of staff and still a good friend, Yebby Watkins.
He belongs there.
I always call Yebby the unofficial mayor of Capitol Hill because everybody knows Yebby, everybody likes Yebby, everybody goes to Yebby. Members tend to love building relationship with him, and he is Jim Clyburn's go-to person. But Yebby was always a good person. I'm trying to think of who else I would put on there. But those two just kind of jumped to mind who's still on the Hill from my time. But
Yeah. Oh, those are two great ones and first ballot nominees, no doubt.
yes, yeah.
Okay, last question for you. You are now the chair of the Democratic National Committee. Is there a Republican, current or former, who you really respect, who you got to know, working with, and you could point to as, hey, you know what? That's exactly the type of member who represents their districts, deals in good faith, and it can be staff or member.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you two that come to mind who I consider to be, my political brothers, even though we're on a different side of the aisle. And that's my co-author for Climbing the Hill, Amos Snead. Amos worked for Roy Blunt when I was working for Jim Clyburn. So he was in the minority whip's office and I was in the majority whip's office. Amos is he's from Alabama. I'm from South Carolina. Just a good guy. And I love Amos like a brother. And again, we don't look at the world politically from the same way, but he's just a good person. Smile that light up a room. I mean, Amos is just just a good old boy. And then also, when I was chair of the South Carolina Democratic Party, my counterpart at the South Carolina Republican Party was Matt Moore. Matt and Amos remind me a lot of each other in many ways in terms of their demeanors. But Matt grew up like I did, poor working class family, and he worked his way up. But Matt's just he's just a class act. They don't make him better than Matt Moore. And he and I would often, when we were chairs, we would meet up, once a month or so, and have lunch or coffee or something like that, just to kind of talk about, we were the only two in the world that understood the craziness of being a party chair. And we're both young guys. So, but he's just salt of the earth type guy. And I really, really respect Matt a whole lot.
Jaime, it's a good note to end on. I want to say thank you first and foremost, but also just how happy I am for the country and the party that you are where you are. The story you shared about seeing Jesse Jackson in 1988, you too have served and are serving as an inspiration to young people in South Carolina and all around the country. And it is an honor to call you a friend. And I, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for what you do. And thank you for sharing time with us today.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you for having this mechanism to get the word out. And I hope a lot of young staffers are listening and learning about how to get better.
They are. I'm hearing a lot of good feedback from current and former staffers. So
that's awesome.
I think you have a lot to offer. I could do this all day with you. So thank you.
Well, again, I love this stuff, man. I love it. So I'll come back another time.
I would love to have you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Well, friends, I can smell the jet fumes at National Airport, which means another episode of Staffer is adjourned. I want to thank you all for listening to the only show created for and about the people who work in government and politics at any level. I do have a quick favor to ask. Please follow, subscribe, and like the show on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Positive reviews are everything in this business, I'm told. And please make sure to sign up for episode alerts at staffershow.com and check out Staffer Show on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Thanks all.